A lot of Europeans think they understand America before they ever live in it. They see the scale, the money, the noise, the branding, the strange mix of confidence and chaos, and they assume the secret must be simple. Maybe Americans just work more. Maybe they market themselves better. Maybe the whole country is running on debt, hype, and luck. Then they arrive, and something feels different. The country does not feel calm. It does not even always feel efficient. It feels like motion. What many Europeans never fully understood about America's success is that it was never built on one virtue. Not hard work alone, not capitalism alone, not patriotism alone. America became powerful by creating a culture and a system that rewards movement. Movement of people, movement of money, movement of ideas, movement between classes, cities, industries, and identities. And if you come from a society that values stability, continuity, and protection, that kind of motion can look wasteful from the outside before it starts looking productive from the inside. That is the real question hiding inside this comparison. Why does America keep producing outsized companies, outsized careers, outsized ambition, even when so much about the country looks messy? And why do many Europeans only start to understand that after they live there? The answer has less to do with whether America's better, and more to do with what America was optimized to do. The first shock for many Europeans is not how rich America looks. It is how movable life looks. In much of Europe, people often build identity around place, a city, a region, a local network, a profession entered carefully and kept for years. In America, identity is more often built around trajectory. Where are you going next? What are you becoming? That difference sounds abstract until you watch how people actually live. The OECD has found that residential mobility is highest in the United States and Australia, with more than 40% of people moving over a 5-year period, while mobility is far lower in Southern and Eastern Europe, where less than 10% move over the same span. The same OECD work links mobility to housing supply, transaction costs, rental rules, job protection, and business dynamism. In other words, this is not just personality, it is structure. America is a place where leaving is normal, starting over is normal, and chasing opportunity somewhere else is normal. Psychologically, that creates a very different default setting. Americans are trained, quietly, to treat uncertainty as a toll you pay for possibility. Europeans, depending on the country, are more likely to ask a different question first. What exactly am I giving up? That is not courage versus fear. It is two different calibrations of risk. One culture normalizes disruption. The other asks disruption to justify itself. Then comes the second revelation. America is not just one country. For business, it often behaves like one giant domestic runway. A company that works in Phoenix can often expand to Atlanta, Denver, or Nashville without changing language, relabeling every product, or relearning entirely different local business cultures. Europe looks similarly large on paper, but living inside it reveals a harder truth. Political unity does not always mean operational unity. The European Commission's 2025 Single Market and Competitiveness Report describes the EU single market as nearly 450 million people, 23 million companies, and about 17 trillion euros in GDP, one of the largest economic spaces in the world. But the same report says persistent barriers and administrative burdens still hold it back, especially in services. It points to diverging employment and tax laws, complex posting of workers' rules, company law differences, packaging and labeling requirements, and new sources of fragmentation that make scaling across Europe harder than the political map suggests. This is one reason America can feel exaggerated to Europeans. It compresses scale. The leap from local success to national success can happen frighteningly fast. That speed shapes psychology. Americans learn to think in bigger numbers earlier because the market rewards them for it. Europeans often learn restraint earlier because their systems reward precision, adaptation, and local legitimacy. Neither mindset is irrational. They are responses to the environments beneath them. But motion is useless without fuel. And this is where many Europeans begin to see a third part of the puzzle. American success has been powered not just by talent, but by deep pools of capital that are willing to bet on unfinished things. In Europe, the idea may be respected. In America, the idea might get funded before it is even fully respectable. The European Investment Bank's report on the scale-up gap says EU scale-ups raise only about half as much capital as comparable San Francisco peers by the time they reach 10 years in operation. It also says venture capital investment in American companies is 6 to 8 times higher than in the EU in a typical year, and that EU venture capital funds account for only 5% of global VC fundraising versus 52% in the United States. More than 4 out of 5 EU scale-up deals involve a foreign lead or sole investor, compared with just 14% in San Francisco. That is not a small cultural detail. It changes which dreams feel realistic. Psychologically, this produces one of America's strangest advantages. Failure can damage your life, but it does not always damage your identity. There is humiliation, yes. There is stress, yes. But in many American professional environments, trying and failing still signals that you are in the arena. In much of Europe, where institutions are older and social penalties can feel stickier, caution is often more socially legible. America, for better and worse, built a culture where overshooting can still look honorable. Then there is the part of the story Europeans often feel most strongly only after arriving. America's success is not purely American in the ethnic sense. It is American in the absorptive sense. It has repeatedly converted outsiders into engines. That does not make the country morally pure, and its immigration system is famously inconsistent and often harsh. But historically, the United States has attracted extraordinary numbers of people willing to leave one life behind and gamble on another. A 2024 Harvard Business School working paper estimates that immigrants account for about a quarter of USA entrepreneurs, and it cites updated evidence showing immigrants made up 30.9% of new business formation in 2023. The paper also reviews evidence that immigrant-founded firms are more likely to patent, engage in R&D, and produce innovations than native-founded firms. Its authors argue that immigrant entrepreneurship is not marginal to the American story. It is one of the core mechanisms behind it. This helps explain something Europeans often notice but struggle to name. America can feel simultaneously insecure and extremely energetic. That is partly because millions of people inside the country are not simply maintaining a place in an old order. They are trying to transform their position inside a new one. A society with large numbers of self-selecting strivers will always feel more performative, but it will also often feel more inventive. And now, the misunderstanding gets personal. Many Europeans arrive in America and instinctively dislike the self-presentation, the confidence, the networking, the way people say great idea before they say show me the evidence, the way ambition is displayed almost in public, like fashion. From the outside, it can look shallow. Inside the system, it often functions as a signal. I am available for opportunity. I am willing to move. I am building something. Talk to me. This is where psychology matters more than economics alone. Status signaling in America is not just vanity. It often works as a sorting mechanism in a high-mobility, low-context society. In places where communities are older and reputations travel through denser local networks, you do not need to advertise yourself as aggressively. People already know who you are, or know someone who does. In America, strangers must become useful to one another quickly. That helps explain why the culture can sound louder than it is. The deeper European misunderstanding is often this. America's surface can look unserious because its manners are informal, but the informality is part of the machine. It lowers social distance. It speeds contact. It allows people from different classes, states, and backgrounds to enter the same room and begin trading possibilities before trust is fully built. That does not always create depth, but it creates velocity. And velocity is inseparable from belief. Pew Research found in 2024 that 53% of Americans still say the American dream is possible, while 41% say it was once possible but is not anymore. Even in an era of cynicism, division, and rising costs, a slim majority still says the dream survives. That matters. A society does not need perfect optimism to be dynamic. It needs just enough people to keep acting as if the next move might work. Europeans often hear that optimism and misread it as naivety. Sometimes it is. America absolutely manufactures illusions. It sells reinvention more easily than it distributes it. But optimism bias can still have economic consequences. If enough people believe action might pay off, they start companies, switch states, change careers, take pitches, buy time, improvise, and keep the economy restless. The belief is not always accurate at the individual level, yet collectively, it can still move history. And this is where the cheap version of the story falls apart, because none of this means Europe is lazy, stagnant, or incapable of innovation. Europe remains enormously productive, highly educated, and institutionally sophisticated. Eurostat reported that EU labor productivity per hour worked rose 1.4% in 2025, even as hours worked per employed person fell 0.3%. Mario Draghi's competitiveness report for the European Commission does not say Europe lacks talent. It says Europe faces slowing productivity, demographic pressure, higher energy costs, and stronger global competition. and needs more investment and innovation to respond. The problem is not that Europe cannot succeed. It is that Europe often translates success into stability sooner, while America keeps translating success into another gamble. That gamble comes with a price. This is the part newcomers eventually feel in their bodies. America's dynamism can be thrilling for the ambitious and exhausting for everyone else. The same flexibility that lets people rise can leave them unprotected. The same weak attachment to place that helps people chase opportunity can also thin out community. The same confidence culture that opens doors can punish those who cannot perform it. Success in America often feels less like arriving than like keeping your balance on a moving walkway that never shuts off. So when Europeans finally understand America, it is rarely because they discovered a single hidden metric. It is because they stop asking, "Why are Americans like this?" and start asking, "What kind of society would produce this behavior again and again?" A gigantic internal market, a culture that normalizes relocation, deep pools of risk capital, a tolerance for self-invention, a country continually energized by people who chose uncertainty on purpose. Once you see those layers together, the surface stops looking random, and then the comparison becomes more humane. Europe is often better at protecting a life once it is built. America is often better at making people believe a different life can still be built from scratch. One civilization leans toward insulation. The other leans toward acceleration. One asks how to preserve dignity. The other asks how to expand possibility. Real people need both. No society ever fully solves the tension. That may be the most important perspective shift of all. America's success was never proof that Americans are wiser, tougher, or more deserving. And Europe's caution was never proof that Europeans lack ambition. Different histories created different emotional reflexes. Different institutions trained different habits. Different landscapes taught different definitions of safety, freedom, status, and risk. What looks like personality at first is often structure wearing a human face. So perhaps what Europeans never understood about America's success was not success itself. It was the psychology underneath it. The country runs on a strange bargain. Insecurity in exchange for mobility, reinvention in exchange for stability, openness to scale in exchange for constant pressure. You do not have to admire every part of that bargain to understand why it has been so powerful. But once you live inside it, it becomes much harder to dismiss it as mere hype. Because in the end, America's success is not just a story about money. It is a story about what happens when a society teaches millions of people, some born there, many not, that the next version of their life might be elsewhere, larger, and still reachable. Different histories create different cultures. Different cultures create different habits. And those habits quietly shape how millions of people think every single day. If you've lived on both sides of the Atlantic, I'd love to know which difference felt most real to you only after you arrived. Not the stereotype, the thing you only understand once it becomes part of your everyday life.